Another nail in the coffin for Labor's renewables con. Chris Bowen's green fantasy has well and truly been exposed again as another offshore wind farm project is dumped or quietly shelved, as it's been described, this time in South Australia. But it's more evidence that Bowen really is making it up as he goes along. This month, the partners behind the Kingston project withdrew an application with federal environmental regulators for the almost $2 billion offshore wind farm project in South Australia. Why, you might ask? Without explanation, apparently. Oh dear, another failed wind farm project. In fact, it's the third such failure in Australia in as many months. Welcome to the circus that is Labor and Chris Bowen's renewables fantasy, full of bright promises of green energy and cheaper bills, and yet no delivery. It can't even get off the ground. Now, I've been in Western Australia for the past 2 weeks, and I took a drive to a lovely part of the state at the weekend called Bunbury. It's about 2 hours southwest of Perth. If you know the area or know WA in general, you'll know it is renowned for its wonderful coastline and beautiful beaches. So it was really nice to sit at a cafe, have lunch and overlook the water. But I couldn't help but wonder how long the beautiful view from Bunbury will be for. Because, of course, Chris Bowen wants to corrupt that particular stretch of coastline with his net zero monstrosities of the sea, wind farms, despite his assurances that even on a good day you won't see the turbines. Now, locals here are rightly concerned about the impact to the pristine landscape, the marine life, the whale migration, for example, and anyone who has driven down the Forest Highway in WA would be aware that this coastline is a tourism hotspot, just like in South Australia with the now scrapped Kingston wind farm project. Now, the initial proposal there was knocked back in August last year by the South Australian Planning Minister, who believed the project had the potential to cause real harm to local aquaculture and fishing industries. In fact, under the original plan, the closest of the turbines would have been about 6.5 kilometres from the coast. I mean, can you imagine the hideous sight 6 k's off the coast? German group Skyborn said in the wake of the rejection, they continue to push on with a plan to develop the project further out to sea, but wholly within Commonwealth waters. And that plan now looks to be dead in the water. And I've got to say, it is great news. Thank goodness another hideous eyesore on our beautiful coastline has been stopped. Thank goodness $2 billion has been spared on a project which only works half of the time. In fact, when locals raised the same environmental concerns about the proposed wind farm in Western Australia, the same one I mentioned earlier, Bowen delivered this genius response.
It's 4,000 square kilometres, 7,000 construction jobs, 3,500 ongoing jobs. We've listened to the community. It's now 41 kilometres from Bunbury and 55 kilometres from Busselton, so you won't see wind turbines. 60% of the overlap with recreational fishing has been avoided. But this is clean energy, lots of jobs and lots of investment in an area that really needs that investment today.
Well, if that was the case, he certainly didn't alleviate any concerns because Bowen, the genius, scaled back the WA project to roughly half the size of the initial proposal. Just like he did in Victoria, he slashed the size of the planned Southern Ocean offshore wind zone by 80% amid concerns about whales and other marine wildlife. And just like he did in New South Wales, where a wind farm zone along the Illawarra coast will now be 2/3 of its original proposed size and further off the coast to protect little penguins, rocky reefs and the southern right whale. And of course, not to mention, it's now 3 strikes on cancelled projects. In July, Arc Energy pulled its plans for a 430 megawatt, 54 turbined wind farm between Armidale and Coffs Harbour in northern New South Wales after deeming the project no longer viable. In October, a proposal to develop the 63-turbine, 441-megawatt Barney's Reef Wind Farm north of Golgong in central New South Wales was ditched. And now the latest, a project in South Australia. Chris Bowen is the minister with the finger on the energy grid and is making it up as he goes along, because every day it's something different, from cancelled projects to wind farms being dramatically scaled back, all the while racking up costs faster than you can blink, and our power bills keep going up. How is Labor's target of getting to 82% renewables by 2030 going? I would say it's completely unplugged. Labor is so far behind the eight ball when it comes to its own renewables targets. The risky renewables-only experiment is set to cost us $595 billion, and the rollout is so far behind schedule, AEMO keeps warning that Australia must move faster to build large-scale renewable projects or risk blackouts and soaring energy prices. And guess what? We are already there. In New South Wales, we were asked to turn off electricity during 3 to 8 p.m. in November because the grid was buckling in a heatwave. It's happened 2 years in a row and we aren't even at the peak of summer. All this as Labor rushes to close down coal plants, the only resource actually keeping the lights on. Farmers too have had enough of transmission lines on their properties. Take New South Wales farmer James Peterson, for example, who is dealing with Transgrid pushing high voltage power lines through his property. From shonky fencing bisecting his sheep paddocks to dead ewes, having to spend hours on the phone dealing with contractors. Have a listen to this.
How often would you have to be dealing with people from the transmission company?
The construction process is intermittent, but at the moment we're on a daily basis.
And what's it like living with that?
Frustrating, takes a lot of time out of our day. I think farmers out here probably have enough on their plate without having to deal with Transgrid on a daily basis.
I mean, who has the time? It is utter madness. James Peterson also said police rocked up to his house to investigate criminal trespass on his own property, the property he owns. These are the farmers, the salt of this country, who wake up every day and see these hideous transmission lines razoring their land. Also, Bowen and Co can connect solar and wind generation to the grid. I mean, this is green vandalism in our own backyards, and we are still paying more, and all we get in return is botched landscape. And I can't quite figure out what is more astonishing, the green fantasy claims being peddled by Labor, or the fact Labor expect us to believe its green fantasy claims, which keep being pushed into the never never. This is a government which has promised to bring down power bills, while at the same time, it's jacked up power bills. Is this seriously Labor's idea of a winning formula? Tell Australians we're going to bring down power prices while increasing power prices. And if we weren't so broken backwards in this country, you'd laugh. 3 shelved wind farms in 6 months tells you everything you need to know about the farce Labor is peddling with its risky renewables-only experiment. If only the Minister for Energy and Climate Change could be shelved too.